Well, it's kind of like when you ask a lawyer for an opinion and they say it depends,
Yeah.
and it really does. It depends on the brand and how desirable the brand is. If it's a chicken brand, it very often is desirable because chicken does well.
Mhm.
If it's some other brand, it might not do as well. But the real key is to determine, I think, first of all, whether you're ready to go international or not. Are your units at home profitable? Are you willing to invest in something that's going to take a lot longer than selling an individual franchise? And are you going to be able to train and support somebody in another country, which may be 15 time zones out? That's the first question to ask. And I want to digress just a bit because in the old days,
welcome to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast, where we talk about all things franchising. Now, here's your host, Dr. John P. Hayes.
Hi, it's John Hayes with another episode of the Franchise Hot Seat. My guest is Bill Edwards. Longtime friends we have been through franchising, and Bill is the master of international development. Bill, it's never been more timely than now to talk to you about international development. And maybe the question for many is, should I do it? Or is everybody in the world mad at us? Is it going that way in franchising? We're pretty friendly in franchising. We have great relationships, you especially, across the world. And you know where American franchisors are most likely to succeed. You know the kinds of brands that could come from other countries into the United States. But this is a new era and a new time. Tariffs, the big frightening word. But beyond that, just our relationships with other countries. What have you noticed, and what do you know, and what are you going to tell us?
well, for the entire time I've been in franchising, which is since about 1990, I've been working with American brands, taking them into other countries. And what I always would tell people is they may not like our politics, but they love our brands,
Yeah.
especially our food brands. I mean, it just seems like more and more all the time we get food brands. In the last few weeks, I've detected a change.
Wow.
And I've also heard this from some other folks that have international experience like mine, that they're beginning to see some pushback in some places. But it's really limited to places that are politically sensitive. It's not the UK, it's not the Australias. It's more of the emerging markets like Malaysia and Indonesia, where they're not overly excited about our support of Israel in the Middle East. And there's some parts of the Americas that are a little concerned about this supposed thing coming up this week called tariffs. And tariffs are going to have an impact on franchising here because it's going to drive up the cost of some of the products and the equipment that U.S. franchises use. If they're bringing anything in from overseas, it's going to increase the cost. And we don't really know what that means in other places. I do think we'll see some pushback. We'll see more pushback in some countries once we know what the tariffs are. You know, I gave a presentation last week to a group of about 60 business people, and they said, what's the single word right now is international business? And I said, uncertainty. We really don't know what we're facing. You know, it's business people, whether they're U.S. or international, are pretty good at figuring out what to do once they know what it is they're working under, the rules and regulations.
Yeah.
Right now, things are up in the air. One day it's going to be this, another day it's going to be that. You've seen that in the markets, and we're seeing that to some extent overseas. When a brand goes into another country, they're looking for a licensee, either a master franchisee or an area licensee who builds, owns, and operates whatever the franchise is. Whatever it is, it's an investment by the local company. And it's not an investment just today, it's an investment over time. Of course, there is that wonderful initial license fee, but really they're committing to open units, restaurants, retail, whatever, offices over a period of time. And when there's uncertainty in the world, people tend to hold back a little bit on investment. So there are some countries where we're seeing that.
Okay. So given that uncertainty is the big word, let's say that I'm a franchisor in the United States. Let's say I have 100 units. I do pretty well. Been growing for 10 years. I've never been outside of the country. People have mentioned to me, there have been inquiries from other countries. Other franchisors have said you really ought to look at the international market. Somebody said you really ought to call this guy Bill Edwards because he knows. And let's say this is a real story that I'm calling you. I don't know you. And Bill, I want to take, and let's just say a food brand because of what you already mentioned. Food brands are so popular internationally. I loved it when I lived in Kuwait because you could get all the American food brands, just about whatever you needed.
The usual suspects.
Right. 4, 5, 6 different brands in pizza, 3, 4, 5, 10 different brands in hamburgers. They love those there. But let's just say I call you and I say, do I just stay home for another year or 3, or what are you telling people who don't have international experience?
Well, it's kind of like when you ask a lawyer for an opinion and they say it depends,
Yeah.
and it really does. It depends on the brand and how desirable a brand is. If it's a chicken brand, it very often is desirable because chicken does well.
Mm-hmm.
If it's some other brand, it might not do as well. But the real key is to determine, I think, first of all, whether you're ready to go international or not. Are your units at home profitable? Are you willing to invest in something that's going to take a lot longer than selling an individual franchise? And are you going to be able to train and support somebody in another country, which may be 15 time zones out? That's the first question to ask. And I want to digress just a bit because in the old days, when we used to say you have to have several hundred units before you can go international. I've learned in the last 10 years especially that that's just not the case at all. What is case is are your units profitable? Will your franchisees say that they are? Do you have the systems in place to train and support people? We actually have taken a brand with as little as 20 franchises internet successfully. And I've seen brands with 1,000 units that aren't ready to go. So you need to be ready to go. You need to be profitable because people are sophisticated in other countries and they're going to ask to say, how do I make money with your brand? The next thing to do is to very carefully choose where you go, not just where the leads come in, but where your brand can open the most units, have the most sales per units, and generate the most royalties for you over time.
And before we go to the where to go, I would think, but you'll know better than I do of the people who call you, I would think most franchisors, when you say to them, are you ready? First of all, are you profitable? Let's say that answer is yes. But are you ready to invest internationally, which raises the question, well, how much money do I have to invest? But also, what does that mean beyond money? I have a small crew. 5 of us are dedicated to franchising, and we do a great job of supporting. Franchisees love us. We get great marks. But what does it mean, Bill, to get ready to franchise internationally? And is there a chance that that'll take me 6 months or 2 years to get ready?
You have to have, of course, a team that can train and support people, not just only here, but in other places. And that means you're better off if you have good technology that helps run your business, because that technology is probably cloud-based and doesn't matter what time zones you're in. But it's going to take people time. It's going to take not only to find, qualify, and sign, but to start up and train and support franchisees overseas. Whether you're doing master franchising, where they're going to open some units and then sub-franchise, or whether they're in the restaurant business, which means they typically build, own, and operate. You have to have people that you can commit to this. Initially, when you're starting out, you don't have to have very many more than what you already have, if any more, because you're starting out with an individual country, and really you're starting out with a franchisee in another country. But as you grow the number of countries, you're going to have to add staff. But supposedly you're getting fees and royalties coming in to support that. But if you've got 3 or 4 people supporting 100 franchisees in the States, it's going to be very tough to take care of the international, because it's going to take more time, different times, different technology.
Do Is it best for the founder of the company or the president of the company, to the one who's gotten maybe a lot of publicity in the United States? Is that important for that person to travel internationally to meet prospective licensees, or does that not matter? Can that person send someone who might become the VP of international or might be the VP of franchise development?
Well, I'm afraid I have to tell you it depends again. Depends on the brand. Some brands are happy to have someone else represent them other than the CEO or the chief development officer, and then deal with the licensee first by Zoom calls, and then when they come to the States for discovery days, which they absolutely have to. I don't really recommend signing license agreements without meeting the people that are your licensee, but some people do that.
Wow.
And then, of course, and then there are some brands that they want, once you've identified for them who the people are, they want to go and see the market. They want to go and see the company that's going to be the licensee and meet the people. I actually support that very strongly.
So
Yeah,
if
it
I'm
really
going,
depends on the people and the company.
yeah, okay. So let's talk then about how much money, and you're going to say it depends. But in a ballpark, what do I need to say? I'm going to devote X thousands of dollars to international development for the next 2 years or 3 years. Talk about that.
Well, you've got a couple of different costs involved. You're going to have somebody's going to have to go and look for the licensee candidates, handle the due diligence to qualify them, and then help to get them signed. You're going to need lawyers to make sure the agreements are enforceable in the country. There's going to be travel to do that. And then, of course, once you sign a licensee in the country, you have to have your team that's going to go into the country and train the staff of the first units once they've done their U.S. training, and then provide startup support, and that can be pretty expensive. If I was going to make a basic case, I would say for the first couple of years you should commit $250,000, all costs, and that includes legal costs, which there are. That includes people costs. That includes travel. And that includes finding the licensees. It might not be that much. In some cases, it might be more. Some of the brands that we work with want to look at 1 or 2 countries at the same time. Others want to look at 5 to 7 countries. It's going to be more. I recommend for a small franchise that's not that well developed in the States, they start with a couple of countries, just a couple, so that they can figure out how their brand's going to actually operate outside the U.S., and they can get their staff used to dealing with people in other places, and they can keep the initial cost down.
And based on that, what you just said, should I think about the United Kingdom because we share a language? Should I think about Canada? That is international. Maybe there'll be changes in the future. And of course, Mexico, English is commonly spoken, and these are closer to home, and I don't have to worry because we don't speak Spanish or Portuguese or French. We don't know if we have to expand in those countries, but we could put those countries off until we get something closer to home. Good idea, bad idea?
I'm not going to use that word. I'm not going to say it depends again, but I did. It depends. It depends on when. Okay. A year ago, I would have said one set of countries. Today, I would say a different set of countries. If you're a U.S. brand, I would strongly suggest you not commit an awful lot of time and effort to Canada right now. U.S. brands are not the in thing in Canada right now. Mexico is very busy. No matter what you read in the newspapers, there's new investment going on in Mexico. Another one is Australia. Australia has some kind of difficult franchising laws and regulations and disclosure requirements, but it's a strong franchise market. One of the strongest markets right now is Saudi Arabia. It's just if you've got a food brand, they want it. And whether they should or not, they do. There's plenty of money. There's plenty of consumers. There's a new franchise law, which is actually a good franchise law that they put in. Another country that's seeing a lot of activity right now is Spain. Spain has the lowest unemployment rate and the highest GDP growth rate in the European Union. It's just busy. The biggest challenge we're seeing right now in Spain is finding locations that want to open. That's a challenge that you like to have. Another country that has been quiet for new franchising for a long time and now is Japan. A couple of years ago, a lot of the big conglomerates decided that in order to expand, they wanted to start with a proven business. So they've seen a lot of new startups of franchises in Japan. Brazil is a big franchise market, but it's 95% local franchises. It's a little bit difficult to get started on. The UK it's a really strange one, John. You'd think by reading in the news that maybe it would not be the right place to go, but it's really very active with new franchise development right now.
And what about South America? Is that, go ahead.
Well, Colombia, Chile are really good franchise markets. As I said, Brazil is a good franchise market. It's just that it's difficult for a foreign brand to get established. But the one thing that I'm watching very closely is a place that I took franchises into 20 years ago and then haven't since then, but now it's changing, and that's Argentina. There is a lot of interest in Argentina right now, new franchise development for the first time in about 20 years. The economy's turned around. Inflation's gone from 200% down to about 10%. And the new government has really made a huge difference. And we're getting a lot of inquiries from Argentina, which is the first time in 20 years.
How important is it, or how is it important that I speak the language of the country to take my brand into that country?
The answer to that question is very simple. It's very important that the licensee that you have has a team that speaks English.
So it's not important that I speak their language, but they must speak English.
That's exactly right. Yeah. When I first started, you had to have interpreters everywhere you go. Nowadays, it's pretty much limited to Japan. Most other places speak English. But the key is that you have a licensee that has the operating staff who can communicate with your staff in the same language.
Yeah. Now, can my company and committing some money, committing time, committing everything you're telling us to do, we want to do to prepare, and we'll set aside the money to invest. We will find the right person already on our team, or maybe we will hire someone who maybe will help us enter 2 or 3 countries eventually in the next year. But how are we going to find these licensees? Do we depend on you to do that totally? And will there be additional expense? For example, I know that the commercial service is very active in a lot of countries. Will we pay them? And do you work with them, or do we work with them and work with you separately? How does that come together?
Some franchisors have an internal team that's doing their international development, and they might go to franchise expos. If they're a U.S. brand, they might work with the commercial service. Not all commercial service posts are franchise friendly, but the ones that are can do a very good job of identifying franchisee candidates. In our case, we've been working with the commercial service since 1992. When I was a franchisor with Alpha Graphics, I started working with commercial service and still do. I'm leaving tomorrow to go to Colombia, Brazil, and Chile on a U.S. commercial service trade mission. Mm-hmm. It's really the company. We started working with a large brand not long ago who has a very highly experienced chief development officer, and she's smart enough to know that she needs help. So she's kind of got her hands full domestically, and so she brought in us, or you could bring someone else in that has experience. If you're working with the U.S. Commercial Service directly, you can do that. It's often better to have somebody in the middle, but you don't have to. And there are countries where they are really good, and there are countries where they don't really stress franchising.
And they don't have people at a post in another country that knows anything about franchising. Is that the issue, or they don't want to do franchising?
Franchising takes a while. You're not selling an airplane or a GE gas turbine. It may take a couple of years from the time you introduce somebody to a company till when the license agreement signed. And that long length of time sometimes puts the post, I call them the post, the country post, off. And it depends on whether they've got somebody that's one of their long-term employees who has focused on and understands franchising. There are quite a lot of them out there that are really, really good, as a matter of fact.
And are there brokers in the international community the way we know them in the United States? A lot of franchisors depend on the broker community to help them generate leads, find good prospects. Can I do that internationally?
There are a couple of broker firms that work with quite a lot of franchises, including competing ones, and they have people on the ground that they work with that have local experience, and they often will go to big expos like the one that just finished in Paris, the annual one there. There are companies that do that. Yep.
Not as popular, though, I take it, as in the United States.
Well, it's different. It's different because finding an international licensee or franchisee is a lot more complicated and sophisticated and time-consuming than finding franchisees, even multi-unit franchisees.
Yes.
So it takes more time. It's more complicated than.
Is it more complicated because you're not looking for someone who wants to operate a Sinorama, but you're looking for someone who wants to build 80 Sinoramas in their region or country, and that means they can't just have several $100,000. They may need to invest millions of dollars. Is money and capability, intelligence, experience, are these all the complicating factors, or are there others?
I find that capital is the least challenge these days. The most important thing is for that company to be passionate about the brand so that they'll take the time to do it right. And if there's challenges along the way, which, believe it or not, there can be, they'll stick with the brand. Also, do they have access to suitable real estate? Do they have a management team that they can put in to operate whatever the units are? Infrastructure is very important. And capital, of course, comes along with that because they want to build the biggest business they can because that's how they're going to make the most money. And so it's not even like a multi-unit franchisee. It's especially if they are a master franchisee, they're an operator of the brand, and then they're also a franchisor of the brand. So you're very often dealing with companies that are bigger than the franchisor.
So in some cases, let's say Germany, a German licensee wants to own the entire country, or at least half of the country, whichever way it goes. And the person has the money, but wants to begin, and is it advisable to begin with just one unit of this terrific chicken or hamburger franchise? Build one or build two. And do you need to do that? Must they do that? Should they do that? Certainly, I think it would be easier to draw prospects to a unit that's already operating to say, hey, you can become a franchisee in this part of the country and you can operate one or you could operate three. So what does the master do? Operate first? They become an operator for a year or two, or how does it work?
Well, that's what they should do. That's what the franchisor should require, that they build, own, and operate some certain number of units themselves before they start sub-franchising. A couple of reasons for that. One is to make sure they understand the business, and another is to show the business actually works. And so when we get somebody that says, well, I'll build one, and if it works, I'll take the rest of the country, that doesn't fly. There's an upfront commitment to open a certain number of restaurants, units, locations over a certain amount of time, or else you don't get the license.
How many American brands successfully, and I'm going to temper that word successfully or explain that word successfully, they make a sale and they collect the money on the initial franchise development fee or the franchise requirement. If it's $1 million for Germany, they're successful in that they found someone who's qualified and they collected the money. How many times a year, do you know, from U.S. brands? How often does that happen? Just out of U.S. brands. I'm not talking about all brands.
Well, there's been some research, but it's not really very good. But anecdotally, people will say that about 50% of the international license agreements never end up with the total number of units being developed that's in the license agreement for one reason or another. And part of it is due to lack of training and support. Part of it is due to lack of choosing the right country or the right licensee. There may be things that happen in a country, war breaks out, or the economy tanks, and the group that is the licensees just eventually says, I don't think this is going to make it. There's not a lot of really good statistics on this, but if you talk to people who are involved in international franchising, they would say probably about 50% never reach the opening the number of units that are in the development schedule in their license agreement for one reason or another.
Any guesstimate on how many initially start out to try to develop and actually collect a fee from a licensee, and then things happen? I remember in Kuwait how things would happen. They loved American brands. But the Kuwaitis would, wonderful people, and they can operate terrific businesses. They make tons of money. But if they lose interest in the brand for whatever reason, because something else caught their eye, that the brand did anything wrong, they just stop. And they invested they may have invested $5 million over a period of time, but that's okay. Easy come, easy go. They move on. So sometimes it's just lack of interest or change of mind, or a family goes broke, or the economy sours in that country. So it's understandable that 50% of the development that was anticipated never happens. But how many get that chance? Any idea?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean, but in order to do business, you find a licensee candidate, qualify them, sign them, and they have a requirement to pay an upfront fee.
Okay.
And to open a certain number of units. And
let's stop it. They required to pay you an upfront fee, and they do. Does that happen? Statistics in franchising are always questionable, because we've been around a long time, we know. And they say there are 4,000 brands, American franchise brands. But I've heard that number for at least 10 years. And prior to that, it used to be 2,500 brands. And now other people say, well, there are really 4,500 brands, and there's a new 400 brands coming into America every year, which must means, because we stay at about 4,000, that 400 of them have disappeared one way or another. Let's say it's 4,000. Will 400 of those brands get a deal in 2025? Not do any development yet, just get a deal internationally.
Boy, that's hard for me to answer.
Okay.
There's different types. There's brands that are new to international, and they would be looking for their first license. And then there's the big boys that are, already in 30 countries that are just adding countries.
2 or 3 more, right. Okay.
Yeah.
The data just isn't there, but it's
the data is not there. The data is not there.
It's so complicated to make it work. It's just a marvel to me. And I know that it works because I've traveled in many, many of these countries. Yeah. And I've seen the developments, and I know the master licensees, and I know the success that particularly American franchising has had abroad. But I also know there's tremendous failure and disappointment. There was a time, and you may have been at the meeting because we attended many of these together. We were in London, and the British Franchise Association scolded the Americans who were in the room. It was a joint BFA, IFA conference on master franchising, and the British said, please stay home, quit selling. None of your deals the development hasn't occurred the way you have planned. And our people are investing money that's not coming to fruition, either through lack of support, or you take the fee and your idea doesn't work in our country. And of course, there would be blame. And maybe you should do your due diligence before you put up $1 million to acquire something from any country that you don't know will work in your country. But it wasn't just that. There was a time when a lot of the deals failed, where the genesis of those deals. It was not only, it wasn't so embarrassing for me, but it was frightful because you thought, does this really work, master franchising? And of course, you were out there already in the 90s as a successful master licensee of American concepts. So I know it works, but is it a marvel to you that it works?
No, not really. If it's a good brand and they've done their homework about whether they should go to the UK or not, and they've done their homework on their candidate, not just that they have money, but they know who they are and they've got a track record, then there's a really high chance of success. But unfortunately, a lot of times I hear about people that somebody comes through the door and with a check and they say, okay, that's great. We'll sell that license to Kuwait. Yeah. I had about 3 or 4 years ago, I had a guy call me from South Carolina. Of course, I'm not going to tell you who this is. He said, I'm a sandwich brand. I'm fairly new. And yet I've got a licensee that just opened in Kuwait, believe it, and now I want to go to other countries. And I said, well, gosh, how many units do you have? 4. And I said, well, why are you in Kuwait? Because the guy brought me a check for $500,000. Yeah. Well, that's not a plan. I believe in proactive international franchise development rather than reactive.
Yeah. Well, okay. I love.
And if you're reactive, the odds are higher that you're going to have failure.
Yeah, and I love Kuwait, and I love people.
Well, I didn't mean to pick on Kuwait.
No. I'm glad you did, because if the guy who gave the $500 million was named Mr. El Shaya, then this little guy in South Carolina was in great hands, as Mr. El Shaya is known for doing that. Owns, when I left Kuwait a long time ago, almost 50 brands, most of them American brands, including Starbucks, that he was developing. And a marvelous man in terms of integrity and his business acumen. The family did a great job in business, but not easy to get his attention. And there are stories about he walked into a chocolate shop in Connecticut or somewhere in New England, loved the chocolate, and said, I want to franchise your business in Kuwait. And of course, they said, we only have one shop. We're not into franchising. Well, they were then, because they got some kind of a nice check, and Mr. Al-Shaya knows how to develop. Which brings me to one of my final questions. Why Saudi Arabia? That is a culture and a country where certainly people are friendly. Many of them have been educated in the United States. They're astute business people, neighboring to Kuwait, lectured there on a number of occasions, but it's difficult to make things happen there. And suddenly seems like out of nowhere in the last 5 or so years, Saudi has made its voice known that they're embracing franchising and they want more American brands. How did this happen?
I think that there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle on Saudi. I first went there in 1994, which was early days, to put it bluntly. Today, the ruler is very pro new business, very pro Western business. Capital is easily available. They're trying to create jobs for their people, and they've come to the conclusion, I believe, from what I hear and talking to officials there, that a proven franchise is a good business to invest in. A lot of things have changed, and as far as the ease of doing business. Up until just a couple of years ago, if you built a restaurant, you had to build 2 restaurants, one for family with the ladies and one for everybody else. Nowadays, that's not the case. I think about 10 years ago, we had a brand, a restaurant, and we took in there, which I won't name. It just financially didn't make it. We took a California seafood brand into Saudi 2 years ago, 5,000 square feet here, doing very well, thank you. Also, you don't need a separate area for unmarried women, all that sort of thing. Yeah. The going in there was a little bit iffy. You never knew exactly if things were right, but now the new franchise law and regulation is very straightforward, not difficult to deal with, and it applies to everybody. Okay, so, and it's a big market, and it's a market where there's plenty of capital, not only to build, but to spend.
Yeah, and they love American brands, which helps a great deal.
Well, a lot of Saudis come here to go to university, and they see the brands.
Yes.
And so when they go home, they want the brand.
Yeah.
Very simple.
So we have we've done a good job, I think, of covering, and of course that depends whether or not you should get into the international markets now, and where should you go, and how much should you have set aside to do international development. And not only that, but do you have infrastructure, particularly people who are going to be able to handle international expansion? Are you lined up properly with your consultants? Do you have a Bill Edwards on a retainer to help you and advise and guide you? Do you have a good international attorney? It might be the same law firm, but you might be dealing with different attorneys in different parts of the world who may be part of that same law firm, but maybe not. Have you developed some relationships with the Commerce Department of the United States? Because if you're an American company, they provide tremendous services to business.
Very cost effective.
And then it's a matter of, are you going to the trigger? And what have we not covered? What are the
number one thing we haven't covered?
Yeah.
In my experience, working with over 40 brands, learning the hard way, John, senior management must be committed to doing this program long term, not just a year and see whether it works or not.
Yes. Okay.
If they're not committed to a new direction for their company, not just financial, but people investment, and taking the time to do it right in the right countries with the right people, then they're going to fail.
And
it's very simple.
Yeah,
it's simple. The commitment of the senior team.
And it's catastrophic if the senior team is not committed, and you've already sold some master licenses in countries, and those families in those countries have engaged their money and their people, their time, their talent. And if you pull support from an international program, this is catastrophic, or can be, for the people involved. So they've got to be committed, got to be willing to stick to it, and there's no guarantee.
That's right.
But there's no guarantee in most of what we do. There's no guarantee in franchising.
Nope.
And yet we regard it as a terrific business model because, well, for one thing, older guys like you and me, we have the experience of seeing it happen. And we've been blessed to be included in the development of some of those countries.
Well, there's certain reasons why you want to go. First of all, there's new markets.
Yeah.
There may be markets with less competition. You know, this country has probably 20 to 30 franchises for every maybe even 100. You're leveraging your existing systems and your intellectual property that you've already built. So if you do it right, you've got a chance to dramatically increase the size of your business and the revenues. But the revenues don't come real fast. Yeah, you get the license fee, but that license fee basically takes care of all the costs to find them, qualify them, sign them, get them started up, and get them to making money.
All right, that's perfect, Bill. You gave a really great recap. You've educated me. You've educated folks who watch this and listen to this. So somebody's going to say, I want to contact Bill Edwards, and they don't have to call me to get you. Of course, you have been one of our founding members of the Titus Center Advisory Board, so people can find you through the Titus Center on our advisory board. But there's an even easier way. Just go directly to Bill Edwards. So how do you want people to contact you?
They can get me on my email, bedwards@edwardsglobal.com. That's bedwards@edwardsglobal.com. Yeah. I'm real good at responding to emails. I get enough of them, just like you do.
Yeah, right. Well, we stay on them. All right, Bill. Well, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. It was great.
Well, thank you for giving me an opportunity to explain whether you hire my company or not. You know, it's not a quick thing, but it can make a dramatic difference in a company if it's done right. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast with Dr. John P. Hayes. Tune in next time for more conversation around all things franchising.